So every year someone has to go first, and Simon's first. So I guess the thing, when people look at someone with an illustrious career such as yours, they think you were destined for this. Were you always destined for a career in medicine, per se?
Well, to tell the truth, when you grow up in a medical family, you think pretty long and hard about whether or not you're going to go into medicine.
Yeah.
And the dinner table conversations about calcium channel blockers and beta blockers and the relative merits of each of them for blood pressure control, I mean, you think pretty hard about it. So I don't think I was destined for it, but at some stage in my high school, I decided it made sense for me, and so I went for it.
Were both your parents doctors?
My father was a doctor, my mother was a nurse.
Right. What sort of doctor was your father?
My father's a cardiologist, a heart specialist.
Hence the beta blockers. Right.
Yes.
What kind of kid were you? Were you bookish? Were you sporty? Were you...
I was pretty bookish. I was pretty interested in science. I was pretty interested in things that, fixing things like Lego, things like fixing things around the house. So it kind of fitted that this was where I would end up, I suppose.
Lego, legs, I see it. I see the connections. So you're born in Palmerston North. What do you remember of your early life? What was childhood like, apart from you being bookish and wanting to fix things?
Childhood for me was fabulous. I grew up in Hamilton after we left Palmerston North, and growing up in New Zealand, I had every opportunity available to me. It was a wonderful place to grow up, where you could go out on the streets by yourself, riding your bike, and there were really no limits. So I think I had a wonderful upbringing in New Zealand.
You're a twin, right?
I am a twin, and I suspect you may have a photo of my sister somewhere, but yeah, I have a wonderful twin sister who's a pathologist.
So you both went into medicine. Competitive much?
Very. No, we're very competitive, but we're very friendly competitive.
Yeah. And you've gone overseas, so are you seeing much of your family these days?
I don't see as much as would be nice. My wife Elizabeth is here, and together we travel quite a bit, and so I've managed to get back to Australia to see my sister, and New Zealand to see my parents every year or two.
Yep. At what stage did you know, not that you were just going to be in medicine, but that the path you needed to be on, that you wanted to head for plastic surgery?
It's hard to say exactly, pinpoint a time when that was a decision I made. A little bit like you said at the beginning, I stumbled through my path, and each time took opportunities that came my way. So there wasn't really one particular point, but I think that when I ended up in the US, I realized that was the point at which plastic surgery was going to be the pathway I took.
Did you have to leave the country to really pursue that path?
I don't think I needed to leave the country to pursue plastic surgery, but I needed to leave the country to see some of the in-depth research and some of the more complex aspects to what I do.
I was interested in surgeons, because it's definitely not a job for everybody, right?
I don't think so.
People that faint at the sight of blood and things like that, it's just not going to work. So you obviously don't have that problem.
No.
But do you...
No.
Good. Do you remember your first sort of lead operation? Can you remember? I mean, I imagine it's not called a theatre for nothing.
Yeah.
There must be nerves.
I think the first time that I was independent was certainly when I was in the US. But there are some, you do all these little things on the way there, and there are hundreds of times when you think, well, boy, I've just made one little step forward. I've moved one little step closer to where I want to be.
You are in your early 40s now?
Correct.
Yeah. So it feels like the field you're in has been hitting a lot of milestones lately. It seems like you timed it well, like, someone of your generation has arrived at a really good time in your field. Would I be right?
Yeah, I think, absolutely. I mean, I'm lucky. I'm lucky when I ended up in this field, because we're at a point where there are a lot of innovations happening, where a lot of the engineering field is linking with the medical field, and where we have new things coming along all the time. And that's really exciting for me, but it also means you have the opportunity to be at the forefront of some areas.
And the hospital in Boston where you work is I would say, a centre of excellence.
Yes.
Tell us a little bit about it. Why is it that, and how did it become that?
So Brigham and Women's Hospital is a hospital that's been around for well over 100 years. and is a conglomeration of several different hospitals, but it's also the birthplace of transplantation. The first kidney transplant was done there by Dr. Murray in the 50s, and then followed up by significantly more in the 1960s. And so it has become very well known for that, obviously in its proximity to Harvard Medical School as well.
You've done a number of hand transplants. Now, I know this probably sounds like an idiotic question, but I'm famous for those. Why do people need hand transplants? And I know they need a new hand, but what sort of reasons have brought them to that point?
So we see every year around 100 people who are missing their hands for any number of reasons. A good number of those are patients who have had serious trauma, either electrical trauma or flame trauma or industrial trauma. There are other patients who have lost their hands because of sepsis, so severe infections where their hands have needed to come off in order to save their lives. So those are the two big categories.
What are the critical factors determining the outcome and success of those kind of operations?
Well, it's hard to give you one or two different things. We spend a lot of time working with these patients. Our goal is to have these patients really prepared for what they're going to go through, so there are no surprises as they go through this whole operation. But we have a whole team of people. We have surgeons, we have anesthesiologists, we have dermatologists, transplant physicians, fabulous anesthesiologists, intensivists, occupational therapists, nurses, scrub techs, all these people who are working together, and it's this conglomeration of people who are all working together to do what they do best to create an end game that's successful.
Is it going too far to say hand surgery or hand transplants are becoming routine at all?
I think they're starting to become routine. There are now around 70 patients around the world who have had a hand transplant. So it's just about at the point where we can say it's routine.
Right. You were also involved in the aftermath of the Boston Marathon bombing, which your skills would have been to the fore. What was that day like from your perspective?
The truth is that was a pretty awful day to be anywhere, and I think everybody understands that. I was operating that day. Normally for most of the hospitals in the city, that day is a public holiday, but my hospital has decided that that's a day we work. And so I just finished my operating list when the bomb went off, or the first of the two bombs went off. And people started news started to spread pretty quickly around the hospital. And so those of us who are still in the hospital all headed down to the emergency room and were involved in some of the initial care of those patients. But I think the lesson that came from both the transplantation we've done and the lesson that came from the marathon bombing, which I think is extraordinary, is that when you put a team of people together, you can really achieve some amazing stuff. And what we were able to do in the Boston Marathon bombing is really save an awful lot of limbs and help an awful lot of people by working together as a team. And so out of something that was pretty horrific, I think a lot of us got a lot of satisfaction and we're really able to help a lot of people, and that's important.
Well, speaking of how you help people, we've got a little video clip that I'd like to play for people, which will explain far better than I can, what your patients are often going through, and just the kind of outcomes they can expect. And I don't think this is where we need the squeamishness warning, but, if you are one of those people, avert your eyes. Can we play that clip?
I looked at it as, if I don't go ahead with it, then I'm going to wonder for the rest of my life whether this was something I should have done. So at least I can say, well, I've tried. When I first saw my arms, I fell in love with them instantly. They were so beautiful. And I think my second thought was, did my donor know how beautiful his arms were? Using my arms for the first time really took ages. For months, they were passive range of motion exercises. Very slowly, over a period of months, as my nerves were moving through the donor tissue, I began to gain function, and sort of the passive range of motion exercises began to turn into more active range of motion exercises, and that was really exciting. And now I can brush my teeth, I can floss, I can pick up silverware now, I can write. And for me, this was the right choice. And for other people, it may not be the right choice. future for me is bright. I'm feeling happy for the future instead of thinking, I just have to make do.
I love that little bit where he says these are beautiful arms. What was the fellow's story that had led him to your door?
So that's Will Lautzenheiser. Will is our fourth patient to have undergone hand transplantation, and he was a professor of film and television. You can see we're at a film premiere for Will in that photo up there. And he had moved states, was just about to start a new job in his early 40s, and developed a very severe, overwhelming infection. And in order to keep him alive, he needed to go onto pressors, which are drugs that keep your blood pressure up. And those drugs eventually caused him to lose blood flow to the hands, and he lost his arms and legs. So a pretty horrific story, but Will is also a story of incredible strength and resilience, and he's somebody who decided that he wasn't going to give up and wasn't going to let that defeat him, and he has spent just every day trying to move forward and trying to be stronger. And one of my favorite stories, if I can use this time is when he was in the intensive care unit and he had a whole lot of pills to take, and the nurses would give him one pill and he'd take a sip of water, and then he'd take another pill and take a sip of water, but they'd have to do it for him because he had no hands. And he said, I decided at that point that I was going to try and make life easier for the nurses, and I was going to take all my pills at one time so they wouldn't have to stand and give me water for every single pill. And that's just Will. He just decided he was going to suck it up and make the world a better place in any small way that he could. And it's just fabulous that he's done that.
Watching his story, excuse me, it made me think about you're very deep in the physical dimensions of healing someone like this, but the psychological dimension of it is massive. Yeah. What people are recovering from, the shock of finding that their body's changed, and then the perseverance required to go through rehabilitation. And how do you get involved in that side of it as well, inevitably?
Yeah. These patients become your friends. I mean, you're seeing them day in, day out, and they put an incredible amount of trust in you, and you have to develop a relationship with them that means that they feel comfortable talking to you about difficult things. They feel completely invested in this whole procedure as well. And a little bit like we're a team as doctors, we're also a team with our patients. The only way that we can successfully get them through all of this is if they really feel part of that team. So you do become very emotionally attached to the whole procedure and to the patient and their family as well. And as a doctor, especially a doctor who oftentimes we're doing episodic care, we're releasing someone's carpal tunnel or fixing this or that, it is incredibly gratifying to develop those deep relationships with your patients.
I imagine never so deep as, and I can't let you go without talking about face transplants. Everyone here is really wanting to hear about it. I think you've said in the past that it's kind of losing its Frankenstein stigma a little bit, but it's still quite shocking, and I imagine that the people that are experiencing this are in a completely other space than it was quite hard for us to imagine. Yeah. How do you deal with those people, and what are they dealing with, and why?
So I think there's these patients have a lot of things to come to terms with, whether it's a hand transplant or a face transplant or a serious trauma. And one of the things that which is sort of intuitive, but we've been able to prove through various different research that we've done, is just how important their families are to them and just how important their social networks are to them. And I think my advice to these patients is always stack yourself with as many people around you who can pick you up when you're feeling down, who can encourage you when you're going through hard times, and who can just kind of be there for you when you need it. And I think that's become a really important part of the way that we look at these patients now as they're going through this.
It's pretty remarkable to think about. So where are we actually going in your field? What are the big goals, and what do you expect to see in your career, if you can predict the future?
Well, I wish I could predict the future, but what I can say is that we're at a really exciting place in reconstructive plastic surgery. We're at a really exciting place in medicine where we're starting to see the junction of engineering and medicine together. And we've obviously seen some of that in areas of things like heart valves and various different prosthetics for limbs, for hip replacements and things like that. But I think what we're seeing is the integration of robotic technologies and truly integrated biologic technologies. And that's an incredibly exciting place to be in. So where do I hope we'll be at the end of my career? Perhaps where we can actually grow limbs that we're adding on, or where we're using robotics that are truly integrated within the body. Either of those would be an incredibly exciting place to be.
And just finally, undoubtedly this is the highlight of your career so far. How did you feel when the university got in touch, your old alma mater said you're a distinguished alumnus?
I'm incredibly honoured to be here. This is, it's very exciting to be back in New Zealand. I love any invitation I can get to be back in New Zealand, and this really is an honour to be recognised as somebody who's contributed. Obviously, there's no way that I would be anywhere near where I am if it wasn't for all the teaching that I got at the university and the encouragement and the passion that I was taught by a lot of my lecturers in the School of Medicine, and I'm incredibly grateful to all of those folks.
Very grateful to have you here. Simon shared earlier that the thing he misses most is New Zealand butter, so feel free to send him Red Cross parcels. Ladies and gentlemen, Simon Talbot.
Thank you.